Eldritch Hollow was a small town that seemed perpetually cloaked in a thick, inescapable fog, shrouding its secrets and whispers of a darker past. At the heart of these whispered legends was the old Wrenwood Manor, standing desolate on the hill overlooking the town. It was in this imposing, forgotten mansion that Eli Montgomery found himself on a dull, drizzly afternoon, driven by boredom and a relentless curiosity about the supernatural. Eli's mother had recently inherited the manor from a distant relative none of them knew well. The house was rumored to be cursed, a claim that only fueled Eli's interest. As his mother discussed renovation plans with contractors downstairs, Eli ventured up the creaking, narrow staircase to the attic. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Eli's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through a small, dirt-stained window. The attic was cluttered with old furniture covered in white sheets, boxes of yellowed books, and trunks filled with moth-eaten clothes. His flashlight beam danced across the room, casting eerie shadows that seemed to flicker and whisper. Eli's attention was drawn to a peculiar chest in the far corner of the attic. It was unlike the others, made of dark wood with intricate carvings that twisted and turned like tortured souls. As he approached, a cold breeze swept through the room, causing the hanging light bulb to sway gently. "Just draughts," Eli muttered to himself, though the back of his neck prickled uncomfortably. He knelt before the chest, the wood cold and smooth under his fingertips. The lock was old and rusted, giving way easily with a forceful twist. Inside, Eli found several ancient artifacts, a cracked mirror, a set of tarnished silverware, and, most intriguingly, a large book bound in what appeared to be skin. Its clasps were made of bone, and it was heavier than it looked. Eli's heart raced with excitement as he traced the symbols etched into the cover. They were neither Latin nor any other script he recognized. Ignoring the growing sense of dread, he opened the book to a random page. The words were written in a sickly, spidery hand, inked in what he hoped was not blood. Unbeknownst to Eli, his mother, Helen, had made her way upstairs, calling out to him, "Eli, are you up here?" Startled, Eli nearly dropped the book. "Yeah, Mom." "Just looking around," he called back, quickly shutting the tome. "What have you found there?" Helen asked, stepping into the attic. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the book in Eli's hands. "Just an old book. It looks really old." "May be valuable," Eli replied, hoping to distract her from the unease that likely mirrored his own. Helen approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "This place is full of old things. You should be careful. Some of them might not be safe to handle." Eli nodded, but as his mother turned to leave, curiosity got the better of him. "Mom, do you know anything about the previous owners?" "Not much," Helen answered, pausing in the doorway. "They were distant relatives, old family. I heard they were a bit odd, into all sorts of strange things." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about this book," Eli replied, his eyes drawn back to the tome. "Well, be careful with that stuff. Old books can be fragile. And—" she hesitated, looking back at him with a seriousness that was uncharacteristic. "Sometimes they contain things best left undisturbed." "Don't worry, I'll be careful," Eli reassured her, though his heart thumped with the thrilling possibility of uncovering something truly supernatural. As Helen's footsteps receded, Eli opened the book again. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to find this. The text seemed to whisper to him, calling out in a voice only he could hear. Trembling slightly, he began to read aloud, the ancient words twisting in the air around him. "Vocare ad regnum de umbra." The air in the attic grew colder, the shadows darker. Outside, the wind rose as if in answer, the trees around Wrenwood Manor bending beneath its force. The whispering seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Eli's voice trembled as he continued, each word feeling more ominous than the last. He stopped abruptly as the shadows seemed to pulse, the light bulb above flickering violently. Eli slammed the book shut, heart racing. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by his ragged breaths. "Eli, dinner's ready." His mother's voice drifted faintly from downstairs. Eli looked around the now still attic, the normalcy of his mother's call stark against the lingering dread. With a deep, unsteady breath, he tucked the book under his arm, intent on discovering its secrets, unaware of the horrors he had just invited into Eldritch Hollow. That night, the air in Eli's room felt stifling, thick with a tension that tugged at the edges of his consciousness. He lay in bed, the ancient tome he'd found earlier resting on his desk across the room. Moonlight spilled through his window, casting long shadows that seemed to creep towards the book as if drawn by an unseen force. Eli's mind raced with thoughts of the day's discovery. The strange symbols, the eerie words he'd read, they echoed in his head, a relentless whisper. He turned in his bed, trying to find comfort in his blankets, but sleep eluded him. Every small sound, the house settling, the wind against the window, felt amplified in the heavy silence that enveloped his room. Finally, giving in to the pull of his curiosity, Eli rose from his bed and approached the desk. The book seemed to throb with an unseen energy as he flipped it open once more. The pages rustled softly under his fingertips, the cryptic text glowing faintly in the moonlight. Maybe just a little more, Eli murmured to himself, rationalizing his need to delve deeper. Just to understand what it's all about. He began to read aloud, his voice low but clear, the ancient words twisting through the air. Tenebris dominari, facies muter. As he spoke the last word, a sudden gust of wind slammed against his window, causing him to jump. Eli quickly shut the book, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced around nervously, half expecting something unspeakable to emerge from the shadows. "Get a grip, Eli," he whispered to himself, his voice shaky. "It's just a book." But as he turned to head back to bed, his reflection in the mirror on his wall stopped him dead in his tracks. It wasn't his face staring back at him. The face in the mirror was twisted, its features grotesque and unfamiliar. Eli's hands flew to his face, feeling his own familiar features, but the reflection remained altered, horrifying. "This isn't real," Eli gasped, stepping back from the mirror. "This can't be real." In a panic, he ran to his bedroom door and flung it open, intending to call for his mother. But as he stepped into the hallway, he caught sight of himself in the hall mirror. His reflection was normal again, his own face looking back at him, pale and frightened. Eli staggered back into his room, closing the door behind him. His mind raced with possibilities, with fears. Was the book causing this? Was it all just a hallucination? Desperate for answers, Eli grabbed the book and tucked it under his arm, heading down the stairs to the living room where his mother, Helen, was still up, reading under a lamp. "Mom," Eli said, his voice trembling, "something's wrong with me. I need to show you something." Helen looked up, concern immediately flooding her face. "What is it, Eli? What's wrong?" "It's this book," Eli said, setting it on the coffee table and opening it to the page he'd read from. "I read from it, and something happened. Look." But before he could continue, Helen's eyes widened in shock. "Eli, your face." Eli froze, a chill running down his spine. "What about my face?" "It's changing," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. "Your eyes, your mouth, it's all twisting." Eli felt a surge of terror. He ran to the small mirror hanging near the front door and gasped. The grotesque reflection was back, more pronounced this time. His eyes were too large, his mouth twisted into a grimace. "This can't be happening," Eli stammered, turning back to his mother. "It has to be the book. It's doing this." Helen stood up, her hands trembling as she approached her son. "We need to get rid of it, Eli. Whatever this book is, it's not safe." Together, they grabbed the book, intending to throw it into the fireplace. But as they approached the flames, the book flew open, pages fluttering wildly as if caught in a storm. Words seemed to leap from the pages, swirling around the room in a dark cloud. "No, we need to find another way," Eli shouted over the chaos, pulling the book back. "Burning it might make things worse." Helen nodded, fear etched across her face. Okay, let's think. We need help, Eli. We need someone who understands these things." Eli, his heart pounding, closed the book firmly, the chaotic energy subsiding as he did. "I'll look online, see if there's anyone who knows about curses or whatever this is." As Helen hugged her son, trying to offer some comfort in the madness that had taken over their night, Eli felt the weight of his actions bearing down on him. They were in this nightmare together now, and he had to find a way out, not just for his own sake, but for his mother's as well. The morning after Eli's terrifying encounter with his altered reflection, Eldritch Hollow woke to a series of unsettling events. Whispers of confusion and fear trickled through the sleepy streets as neighbors discovered that they no longer recognized one another. At the local diner, chaos erupted when patrons confronted the strangers wearing their friends' and families' faces. Eli, having spent a sleepless night researching online for anyone familiar with curses or ancient texts, felt a pang of guilt as he heard the news from his mother, who was on the phone with a friend from town. "Eli," Helen said, her voice strained with worry, "it's not just us. Something's happening all over town. People's faces are changing." Eli's stomach turned. The curse was spreading, and it was his fault. He clutched the cursed book tighter under his arm, feeling its sinister energy pulse against his side. "I found someone," Eli replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "An expert in occult history. I emailed him everything last night. He's a few towns over, said he can come by today." "That's good," Helen said, though her eyes were filled with doubt. "What do we do until then?" "We need to warn people, tell them it's temporary, to stay calm." "Can you help with that?" Helen nodded, picking up her phone again. "I'll start calling everyone. Be careful, Eli." Eli nodded and grabbed his jacket, heading out into the cold morning air. The town felt different, tense and suspicious. Faces, not quite right, glanced at him with fear and confusion as he passed. Eli made his way to the center of town, where a small crowd had gathered, their voices loud and panicked. "Everyone, please, listen," Eli called out, standing on the steps of the town hall. The crowd turned towards him, dozens of mismatched faces staring back. "I know this is scary, but we're trying to fix it. We've contacted an expert who should be here soon. Please, go back to your homes and wait for more information." A man in the crowd, with the face of a young woman, stepped forward. "How do we know you're not to blame? You're the Montgomery kid, right? Your family brought that cursed book into town." The accusation stung, and a murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. Eli felt his resolve waver, but he knew he had to be strong. "I am responsible," Eli admitted, his voice faltering. "I found the book and read from it, not knowing what it would do. I'm so sorry, but I'm trying to fix this. Please, you have to trust me." A tense silence fell over the crowd. Finally, an elderly woman, her face now that of a middle-aged man, stepped forward. "We've known you since you were a boy, Eli. We'll trust you for now. But please, hurry." Eli nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "Thank you. I'll update you as soon as I can." As the crowd dispersed, Eli's phone buzzed. It was the expert, Dr. Thorne. "I'm on my way," the text read. "Keep the book safe until I arrive." Eli pocketed his phone and headed home, feeling the weight of the town's trust and fear. As he walked, he thought about the faces he'd seen, the confusion and fear they held. It was more than just a physical change. It was deeply personal, attacking the very identity of his neighbors. Back at home, Helen was still on the phone, her voice a calming presence in the storm. She looked up as Eli entered, worry etched deep in her features. "He's on his way," Eli said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "That's good," Helen replied, putting down her phone. "I've spoken to nearly everyone. They're scared, Eli, but they're willing to wait. I know, and I'll fix this." "I have to," Eli said, feeling the burden of his promise. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Eli and Helen exchanged a nervous glance. Eli walked over and opened it, revealing a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a stern face. "Dr. Thorne?" Eli asked. "Yes. You must be Eli." "Let's get to work," Dr. Thorne said, stepping inside. As Helen led Dr. Thorne into the living room, Eli followed, clutching the book. The next few hours would determine the fate of Eldritch Hollow, and Eli could only hope that they were enough to undo the curse he had unwittingly unleashed. Dr. Thorne wasted no time. The moment he stepped into the living room, he asked to see the book that had caused so much upheaval in Eldritch Hollow. Eli, hesitating only a moment, handed over the tome with a shaky hand. Dr. Thorne laid the book gently on the coffee table, his expression grim as he opened it to the page Eli had read from. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Dr. Thorne muttered, adjusting his glasses and peering closely at the text. Eli and Helen stood by, watching anxiously. "This is a rare dialect, ancient and very powerful," Dr. Thorne said after a few moments. "It's not just about changing faces. It's about swapping essences. The soul, the being, the very identity of a person can be displaced. This book, it's a dangerous artifact." Eli gulped, feeling the severity of his mistake weigh down on him. "Can we reverse it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's possible," Dr. Thorne replied, "but it will require precise magic, something that counters the spell you unwittingly cast. We need to understand exactly how you invoked this curse." Eli recounted the events in the attic, every detail he could remember, from the way the wind had picked up as he read to the flickering of the lights. Dr. Thorne listened intently, nodding occasionally, jotting notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. "As I thought," Dr. Thorne said finally, closing his notebook with a snap. "You initiated a classic binding spell without realizing it. The conditions were just right. The storm, the location, your state of mind. It's almost as if the book was waiting for someone like you." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. "Waiting for me?" "Yes, it's not uncommon for artifacts of this nature to have a sort of sentience. They can influence those around them to achieve their ends," Dr. Thorne explained. "Now, to break the curse, we need to perform a counter-ritual, but it must be done carefully, and with everyone affected." Helen interjected, her voice tense. "How do we gather everyone in town? And how do we ensure this doesn't get worse?" "That's where I come in," Dr. Thorne said with a slight smile. "I have contacts who can help us prepare. But we must act quickly. The longer the spell persists, the more difficult it will be to reverse." Eli nodded, determination settling over him. "Tell us what to do." "We'll do it." "Good," Dr. Thorne replied. "First, we need to create a safe space to conduct the counter-ritual. It must be somewhere significant to the spell's origin, somewhere linked to the book." "The attic," Eli said immediately. "That's where I found the book and where I read from it." "Perfect," Dr. Thorne said. "Next, we'll need to prepare the space ritually. Salt circles, candles, specific incantations. I'll guide you through it." "And the people?" Helen asked. How do we prepare them? They must be willing participants. Their consent is crucial for the ritual to work, Dr. Thorne explained. They need to understand what's happening and agree to take part. I can help with that, Helen said, her voice firm. I'll talk to them, explain everything. They trust me. Excellent, Dr. Thorne said. Meanwhile, Eli, I need you to gather a few items from around your home. Items that are personal, that hold emotional significance to you. They will help anchor you during the ritual. Eli nodded and hurried off to collect the items, his mind racing. As he gathered a worn photograph of his father, a baseball glove from his childhood, and a book of poetry his mother had given him, he felt a mix of fear and hope. When he returned, Dr. Thorne was setting up the living room with various ritualistic items, candles, chalk, and strange aromatic herbs. Eli placed his items on the table, and Dr. Thorne arranged them in a specific pattern. Now, Dr. Thorne said, looking at both Eli and Helen, we prepare. This evening, we perform the ritual. Eli, you'll be at the center of it. It's important you stay focused, no matter what happens. Eli nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. I'm ready, he said, more to convince himself than anyone else. As the day wore on, Helen worked tirelessly, contacting everyone affected, organizing them, reassuring them. Eli helped Dr. Thorne with the preparations, learning more about the mystical world he had accidentally tapped into. By evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Eldritch Hollow, the townspeople began to arrive at Wrenwood Manor, their faces anxious but determined. Eli looked over the crowd, their strange, mismatched faces staring back at him. He took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next, to right the wrong he had caused. As they moved to the attic, the heart of where it all began, Eli felt a surge of hope. Tonight, they would fix this. Tonight, they would restore what had been lost. The attic of Wrenwood Manor had been transformed. Under Dr. Thorne's meticulous direction, the dusty, cluttered space was now a carefully arranged ritual chamber. Salt lines crisply defined the boundaries of the ritual circle, and candles flickered in a protective perimeter. Symbols, arcane and ancient, were drawn in chalk across the floorboards, their meanings explained in hushed tones to all who were present. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the townspeople of Eldritch Hollow, faces still mismatched and foreign, gathered in a semicircle around the attic. Among them was Eli, who had assumed an unexpected role of leadership. Beside him, Helen and Dr. Thorne were finalizing the preparations. "Everyone, please listen closely," Dr. Thorne began, his voice steady and commanding. "Tonight, we perform a ritual to undo the chaos that has befallen our town. Each of you plays a crucial part in the success of this endeavor. Your willingness, your focus, and your courage are essential." Murmurs of assent rippled through the group. Eli stepped forward, clutching the book to his chest, feeling its sinister energy pulsing against his palms. He met the eyes of his neighbors, seeing their fear, their hope, their trust. "I know this is strange and scary," Eli addressed the crowd, his voice cracking slightly under the weight of his responsibility. "But we're in this together. We can fix this. We can restore our lives to how they were." Nods and quiet words of agreement strengthened Eli's resolve. He turned to Dr. Thorne, giving him a nod to continue. Dr. Thorne directed everyone to take their places within the circle. "Remember, do not step outside the chalk lines until the ritual is complete. Hold your candles steady, and repeat the incantations after me." The room grew still, the only sounds the crackling of the candles and the soft rustling of the book's pages as Eli turned them to the prescribed spell. His hands trembled, but his voice was strong as he began to read the incantation aloud, Dr. Thorne echoing his words, guiding the townspeople to join in. Spiritus loci, exordi nos, the room chanted in unison, the words vibrating through the air. The candles flared as if in response, and a cold wind swept through the attic despite the closed windows and doors. Eli's heart raced, his eyes fixed on the book, the symbols on the floor beginning to glow faintly with an ethereal light. Red quod fiut, red hoc nunc. Dr. Thorne led the next line of the chant, his voice rising over the growing wind. Eli could feel something shifting, the atmosphere charged with electricity. He glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly, her voice joining the chant, strengthening it. Suddenly, the center of the circle, right where Eli stood, began to emit a soft, golden light. The book in his hands vibrated intensely, the ancient text shimmering on the pages. Eli continued to read, his voice now almost a shout to be heard over the wind and the collective voices of the town. The light expanded, enveloping each person within the circle. Faces began to shimmer, blurring and shifting rapidly. Eli watched, heart in his throat, as the familiar features of his neighbors started to reappear, their true faces returning. Tears, cheers, and cries of disbelief mingled with the incantations, creating a cacophony of noise and emotion. Complimus, ad finem. Dr. Thorne's voice boomed for the final push. With a deafening crack, the light burst outward, filling the room with blinding brilliance. Eli shielded his eyes with his arm, the book falling to the floor as he felt an overwhelming rush of energy pass through him. The wind died down suddenly, the light faded, and the room fell silent, save for the soft patter of the book's pages settling. As his eyes adjusted, Eli looked around. The candles had burned down significantly, but the faces, his mother's, Dr. Thorne's, his friends and neighbors, all were restored. Their true, familiar faces, albeit worn and weary from the ordeal, looked back at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Did it work?" his mother whispered, her voice trembling. Eli nodded, unable to speak as he surveyed the room. People were touching their own faces, hugging each other, tears streaming down their cheeks. The curse was broken. Dr. Thorne, looking older and more tired than before, picked up the book and closed it with care. "You did well, Eli," he said, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You saved us all." As the group began to disperse, heading back to their homes to rest and recover, Eli felt a profound sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. The night had taken a toll on him, but as he looked at the faces around him, true and familiar once more, he knew it was worth every bit of fear and uncertainty. They had faced the unknown together and emerged victorious, a testament to the strength and unity of Eldritch Hollow. In the aftermath of the successful ritual in the attic, the townspeople of Eldritch Hollow began to slowly rebuild their sense of normalcy, but for Eli, the journey was far from over. The book, now sealed and locked away in his room, still throbbed with a dark energy, hinting at dangers yet untold. Dr. Thorne, too, seemed deeply concerned, pacing the living room as he spoke with Eli and Helen about the next steps. "We've managed to correct the immediate wrongs, but the book's power is far from contained," Dr. Thorne said, his brows furrowed in thought. "There are deeper magics at work here, Eli, magics that were stirred by the ritual, which we cannot ignore." Eli, still feeling the weight of his previous actions, nodded solemnly. "What do we need to do?" Dr. Thorne stopped pacing and turned to face him. "We must prepare for a more permanent solution. The book must be returned to its origin, sealed in a place where its power can do no harm." "And where is that?" Helen asked, her voice tinged with worry. "A place of ancient power, deep in the forests north of here," Dr. Thorne replied. "But getting there will not be easy. The path is fraught with dangers, and the forest itself is unnatural. We'll need to be fully prepared." Eli took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Tell us how to prepare." "I'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Thorne nodded, pulling out several old leather-bound tomes from his bag. First, we need to gather specific artifacts capable of protecting and empowering us during the journey. Some of these are quite rare and will require a bit of unconventional acquisition. Over the next few days, Eli and Helen worked tirelessly. Dr. Thorne instructed them on the gathering of various mystical components: herbs that whispered in forgotten languages, stones that pulsed with the heartbeat of the earth, and waters collected from moonlit springs. Meanwhile, Eli took to studying the tomes Dr. Thorne had brought. He learned incantations and spells, practiced movements that felt more like elaborate dances, and read about the creatures they might encounter in the forest. One evening, as they sat around the dining-room table with maps and notes spread out before them, Dr. Thorne explained the final piece of their preparation. "There is one more thing we need, a crystal known as the heart of the forest. It's said to be in the possession of a recluse, a woman who lives alone on the edge of the forest. She's peculiar, but she understands the ways of the old magic. How do we convince her to give us the crystal?" Eli asked, his fingers tracing the lines of the map. Dr. Thorne smiled wryly. "We don't convince her. We ask, respectfully, and hope she sees the necessity of our cause." The next morning, with their preparations nearly complete, Eli and Dr. Thorne set out to visit the recluse. The journey to her cabin took them along winding paths covered in thick moss and through groves where the trees seemed to watch them pass. Finally, they arrived at a small, quaint cabin surrounded by an overgrown garden. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wildflowers. They approached the door, and Dr. Thorne knocked gently. After a moment, the door creaked open, and a woman appeared. Her hair was wild, streaked with grey, and her eyes shone with an intense, knowing light. "Dr. Thorne, I presume," she said, her voice as textured as the bark of the trees surrounding her home. "And you must be Eli. I've been expecting you." "You have," Eli said, surprised. The woman nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "The forest tells its secrets to those who listen," she explained as she led them into her home, filled with hanging dried herbs and strange, shimmering artifacts. "We've come to ask for the heart of the forest," Dr. Thorne said, getting straight to the point. "We need it to secure a dangerous artifact, to prevent further harm to the people of Eldritch Hollow and beyond." The recluse paused, her gaze piercing Eli. "And you, young man, are you ready to carry such a burden?" Eli met her gaze, feeling the weight of his responsibilities settle deeper on his shoulders. "Yes, I made this mess, and I'll fix it." She studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. I will help you. But know this, the path you choose is fraught with more danger than you can imagine. The heart will guide and protect you, but it also demands respect and understanding." She walked to a small wooden chest and opened it, pulling out a crystal that pulsed with a gentle green light. "This is the heart of the forest," she said, placing it in Eli's outstretched hands. "Guard it well." Eli felt a warmth spread through his palms, a sensation of deep, ancient power. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. "You are welcome," she replied. "Now go, and be careful. The forest is watching." With the crystal secured, Eli and Dr. Thorne left the cabin, the weight of their task heavy but their resolve firm. They returned to Wrenwood Manor to finalize their plans, ready to face whatever awaited them in the forest. They knew the journey ahead would test them in ways they could not yet foresee, but they were prepared to face it, together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense canopy of the old forest, Eli, Dr. Thorne, and Helen set off on the path that would lead them to the heart of the ancient woods. The heart of the forest, now securely wrapped in a piece of soft leather and tucked in Eli's backpack, seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, a constant reminder of the weight of their mission. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures and the rustling of leaves, creating a symphony that was both eerie and beautiful. Dr. Thorne led the way, holding a compass and occasionally consulting an old, worn map illuminated by the light of his lantern. "We need to be vigilant," Dr. Thorne whispered back to Eli and Helen. "The forest is old, and it doesn't take kindly to intruders. Keep your eyes open for any signs of the Netherkin. They are the guardians of this place, and they will test our intentions." Eli nodded, feeling the cool air prick at his skin. He reached into his pocket, feeling the reassuring texture of the protective amulets they had crafted the day before. "How will we know when we encounter a Netherkin?" he asked, his voice low. "They often take the form of shadows or distorted creatures of the forest. Anything that feels out of place or unsettling is a sign," Dr. Thorne explained, his eyes scanning the darkened path ahead. As night fell completely, the forest seemed to close in around them. The path became less defined, more a suggestion than a clear trail. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees, stopping them in their tracks. "Stay close," Dr. Thorne instructed, setting down his lantern and pulling a small vial from his coat. He opened it, and a faint, silvery smoke drifted out, swirling around them in a protective barrier. The growling grew louder, and a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness ahead. The figure of a large wolf, its fur matted and eyes unnaturally bright, stepped into the light of the lantern. "Do not fear," Dr. Thorne said quietly to Eli and Helen. "Remember, fear feeds their power." The wolf paced back and forth, its gaze fixed on Eli. Then, in a blur of motion, it charged. Eli's heart raced, but he stood his ground, clutching one of the amulets. As the wolf leapt, it suddenly shifted form, becoming a swirling mass of shadow and wind. Just as quickly, it dissipated into the air, leaving behind a faint echo of a howl. "That was a test," Dr. Thorne said, picking up his lantern again. "A minor one, but a test nonetheless. We passed." They continued deeper into the forest, the trees growing thicker, their branches twisting into strange shapes. The air grew colder, and a thin mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around their ankles. "It's much colder than I expected," Helen murmured, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's the forest," Dr. Thorne replied. "It's not just the weather. It's the magic of this place. It's trying to disorient us." Eli felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. He looked back, and for a moment thought he saw a figure watching them from behind a tree. When he blinked, it was gone. "Did you see that?" Eli asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What did you see?" Dr. Thorne asked, stopping to look back. I'm not sure. A figure, watching us." "Keep moving," Dr. Thorne said, his voice firm. "Don't let the forest play tricks on your mind. Focus on the path, on the mission." The further they walked, the more surreal the surroundings became. Trees seemed to bend towards them, and faces appeared and disappeared in the bark and leaves. Whispering voices called out from the darkness, speaking words in languages Eli didn't understand. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a loud, rumbling sound filled the air. The trees around them swayed violently, as if caught in a storm. "An earthquake!" Helen exclaimed, grabbing onto a tree for support. "Not an earthquake," Dr. Thorne said, looking around warily. "Something is coming. Something big. We need to find shelter." Just then, a massive figure emerged from the darkness. It was a giant, made of earth and stone, its eyes glowing with a fierce red light. It moved towards them, each step causing the ground to shake. "This is no ordinary guardian," Dr. Thorne said, pulling out another vial. "This one is ancient, powerful. Eli, get ready." Eli nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. He pulled out his own vial, and together with Dr. Thorne, they prepared to face the giant. Whatever the forest threw at them, they were ready. or so they hoped. The giant of earth and stone loomed over them, a behemoth of the forest's ancient guardians, its eyes glowing ominously in the dark. The ground trembled with each of its steps, leaves and small stones dancing around their feet from the force of its movement. "Eli, remember the incantations we practiced," Dr. Thorne shouted over the rumbling, his voice steady despite the clear danger. He quickly mixed the contents of 2 vials, creating a sparkling, luminescent mist that hovered around their small group. Eli nodded, pulling a small, worn book from his backpack. His hands shook as he flipped to a marked page. "I got it," he called back, his voice cracking with nervous energy. As the giant approached, Helen clutched her own amulet, whispering a prayer. "Be careful, both of you," she said, her eyes wide with fear but filled with determination. Eli began to recite the incantation, his voice growing stronger with each word. The ancient language felt awkward on his tongue, but he spoke with as much conviction as he could muster. "Terra gigas exordi me vocem." The air around them thickened, and the light from Dr. Thorne's mist seemed to pulse in rhythm with Eli's chant. The giant paused, its head tilting slightly, as if confused by the sudden defiance. Dr. Thorne joined in, his voice echoing Eli's. "Vincula terrae, solvite." His words added power to the incantation, the mist swirling faster around them. The giant roared, a sound so deep and loud it shook the leaves from the trees. It raised one massive, stone-laden arm and swung it toward them. Eli and Dr. Thorne braced themselves, continuing their chant without faltering. Just as the giant's arm was about to crash down upon them, the mist exploded into a brilliant light, enveloping the giant's limb. The arm froze mid-air, the stones and earth that composed its form beginning to crack and crumble. "Keep going, Eli," Dr. Thorne urged, his eyes fixed on the giant. "It's working." Eli repeated the incantation, pushing every ounce of his will into the words. The ground beneath the giant's feet began to glow, etched runes appearing as if burned into the earth by the intensity of their spell. "Redire ad terram," they shouted together, the final words of the spell. With a thunderous groan, the giant staggered, its form starting to break apart. Large chunks of earth fell to the ground, disintegrating before they touched the soil. The glowing eyes dimmed, turning into dull, lifeless stones. As the last remnants of the giant collapsed into a heap of dirt and rubble, the forest fell silent, the only sounds their heavy breaths and the soft rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. "We did it," Eli gasped, his relief palpable. He closed the book, his hands still trembling. "Yes, we did," Dr. Thorne replied, his gaze sweeping the area as if to ensure no other threats would emerge. "But we must move quickly now. The forest knows we are here, and it will not stop sending guardians to test us." Helen came forward, her face pale but her eyes filled with pride. "You were both incredible," she said, hugging Eli tightly. Dr. Thorne nodded in agreement, but his face was grave. "We must reach the heart of the forest by dawn. The deeper magic must be sealed, and the book returned to its rightful place." The trio gathered their belongings quickly, their earlier encounter having spurred them to move with renewed urgency. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to watch them pass, whispering secrets in a language only the wind understood. Eli felt a change in the air as they neared their destination. The forest seemed denser, the shadows deeper, and even the path under their feet felt as if it were guiding them, pulling them forward to an unseen destination. Finally, after what seemed like hours of tense, unspoken anticipation, they arrived at a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and vines, bathed in the light of the moon which seemed to pierce the canopy directly above it. "This is it," Dr. Thorne said, his voice a whisper in the sacred stillness of the clearing. "The heart of the forest." Eli looked around, feeling a deep connection to this place, as if the forest itself had accepted them, at least for the moment. They approached the altar, the book in hand, ready to complete the final part of their quest. As they set the book on the stone surface, the symbols on the cover began to glow, a soft, golden light that filled the clearing with warmth. Dr. Thorne and Eli exchanged a look, a mutual understanding that what came next would change everything. "Let's finish this," Eli said, his voice steady, his resolve clear. He opened the book to the final spell, ready to seal away the dark powers it held, once and for all. In the ancient clearing, under the watchful gaze of the moon, Eli, Helen, and Dr. Thorne stood ready to confront the final challenge. The stone altar before them was bathed in a mysterious light that seemed to pulse in harmony with the rhythms of the forest around them. The air was thick with anticipation, and the trees themselves appeared to lean in closer, eager to witness the unfolding ritual. Dr. Thorne opened the ritual with a solemn tone, addressing both Eli and Helen. "This is the moment where we must be most precise. The spell we are about to cast is not only to seal the book, but to heal the land it has scarred. Eli, you will lead the incantation. Helen, your role will be to anchor our physical presence to the here and now, to keep us grounded." Helen nodded, her hands clasping tightly around a small, silver locket, a talisman that had been in her family for generations. Eli took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon his shoulders as he stepped forward to the altar. The book lay open on the ancient stone, its pages fluttering as if alive. Eli began to read from it, his voice clear and resonant in the night air. "By the power of earth and sky, by the light of the moon up high, we bind thee here, never to fly. Return thee now, where thou shalt lie." As Eli spoke, Dr. Thorne sprinkled a circle of salt around them, reinforcing the boundary of their sacred space. The air within the circle began to shimmer, as if the fabric of reality was thinning. "Continue, Eli, you're doing well," Dr. Thorne encouraged, his voice steady despite the rising wind that began to whirl around them, sending leaves dancing like spirits in the night. Eli repeated the incantation, each word imbued with the collective hope and will of the trio. "Roots of the earth, hold fast and deep, winds of the north, guard our sleep, flame of the west, let thy power leap, waters of the south, secrets keep." The symbols on the book's cover glowed brighter with each line, casting eerie shadows across the stone altar. The ground beneath them trembled gently, as if the very earth approved of their actions. Suddenly, a gust of wind extinguished the candles around them, plunging the clearing into darkness, lit only by the luminescent glow of the book. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, emanating from the book itself as it began to levitate slightly above the altar. Eli, spurred by the urgency of the moment, continued with greater fervor. "Seal of old, bind once more, shadows flee, through yonder door, peace to keep, forevermore, close the wound, heal the sore." As he spoke the final words, a brilliant beam of moonlight pierced the canopy, centering on the book and illuminating the clearing with a celestial glow. The pages of the book flipped rapidly, as if caught in a storm, before slamming shut with a definitive thud. The ground settled, and the wind died down as quickly as it had arisen. The book gently descended back onto the altar, its glow dimming until it looked like nothing more than an ordinary, albeit ancient, tome. "It is done," Dr. Thorne said quietly, his gaze fixed on the book. "The curse is sealed within its pages once again." Helen, released from her anchoring task, stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears of relief. She embraced Eli tightly, murmuring, "You did it, my son. You've saved us all." Eli felt a mixture of exhaustion and elation. "We did it together," he corrected softly, looking over at Dr. Thorne, who was inspecting the book one final time. "Yes, together," Dr. Thorne agreed, closing the cover of the book and securing it with a heavy iron clasp. "But remember, this power is merely bound, not destroyed. The book must be guarded, kept safe from those who would seek to use its power for ill." The trio lingered in the clearing for a moment longer, taking in the peace of the forest that felt renewed, as if a great burden had been lifted from its shoulders. The trees seemed to stand a little taller, the air felt a little cleaner, and the night sang with the sounds of a forest at peace. As they made their way back through the woods, the path clear and the moon guiding their way, they felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a somber respect for the power they had encountered and contained. They knew their lives would never be quite the same, forever changed by the knowledge of the darkness they had faced and overcome. Back at Wrenwood Manor, as they stored the book in a new, secure location designed to contain its magic, they each felt a solemn pride. They had faced unimaginable forces and had emerged victorious, but the victory was tempered by the knowledge that they must remain vigilant, always aware of the delicate balance they had restored. The morning after the ritual, the town of Eldritch Hollow awoke to a world that seemed brighter and more vibrant than it had in weeks. Birds sang with renewed vigor, and the sun shone through the leaves of the trees with a gentle warmth that promised new beginnings. Eli, despite the exhaustion that clung to his bones, felt a profound sense of peace as he walked through the town square, observing the normalcy that had returned. As he passed by the local cafe, the owner, Mrs. Cartwright, who had regained her original face just days before, waved him over with a smile. "Eli, come here, dear," she called, her voice warm and inviting. Eli approached, and she handed him a cup of hot cocoa, no charge. "For our hero," she said, winking. "I don't know what exactly you did, but thank you for bringing us back to ourselves." Eli accepted the cocoa with a shy smile. "It wasn't just me, Mrs. Cartwright. It was all of us together, perhaps, but you led the way, Eli." "We're all very grateful," she replied, patting his hand. As he continued his walk, Eli reflected on the events that had unfolded. The town felt different now, aware of a world beyond what they had known, a world full of magic and mystery, dangers and wonders. When he arrived back at Wrenwood Manor, he found Helen and Dr. Thorne in the study, surrounded by books and papers. They were deep in conversation about the future, about how to protect the town and the book. "Ah, Eli, there you are," Dr. Thorne said, looking up as Eli entered. "We were just discussing some important matters. Have a seat." Eli sat, curious. "What kind of matters?" "We need to think about the long term," Helen began, her expression serious. "The book is safe for now, but who knows what the future might bring? We need a plan to keep it secure, and more importantly, to educate others about these forces, so they're not so easily abused." Dr. Thorne nodded in agreement. "We're considering establishing a small, discreet group of guardians, people who understand and respect the power of the book, who can protect it and ensure its secrets do not fall into the wrong hands. And we want you to lead it, Eli," Helen added, her eyes searching his. Eli was taken aback. "Me? But I'm not a magician or anything." "You have shown great courage and a keen mind for this work," Dr. Thorne said firmly. "You have what it takes to learn, and more importantly, you have the heart to understand the responsibility." Eli considered this, the weight of the proposal heavy on his shoulders. Finally, he nodded. "If you think I can do it, I'll try. For the town, for all of us." "Good," Dr. Thorne said, a smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "And I'll be here to guide you, for as long as you need." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Eli, Helen, and Dr. Thorne worked tirelessly to set up the framework for the new guardianship. They reached out to other scholars and practitioners of the mystical arts, some of whom Dr. Thorne had known for years. They set up protocols, safe houses, and training programs. One evening, as they were finalizing some of their plans, Eli looked around at his new companions, his heart full. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" he mused aloud. "We are," Helen replied, squeezing his hand. "And I'm so proud of you." Eli smiled, feeling the rightness of this path. It was strange to think how much had changed, how much he had changed. from a curious boy in a dusty attic to a leader in a hidden world. As the sun set over Eldritch Hollow, casting long shadows across the ground, Eli felt a connection to something much larger than himself, a thread woven through the very fabric of reality. He knew there would be challenges ahead, dangers and decisions that would test him in ways he couldn't yet foresee. But he also knew he wouldn't face them alone, and somewhere, deep in the woods, the trees whispered among themselves, old magic stirring under the surface. Eldritch Hollow was safe, for now, under the watchful eyes of its new guardians, and life, with all its mysteries and marvels, went on.